Good morning, everybody. Long time no see. Good morning. All right, so we have a reading. So you have to say that. So this is Keisha.
Hi, I'm Keisha.
My better self. Okay, so this is Judges 7, Gideon's 300 chosen men.
Gideon's 300 chosen men. Then Gideon and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands. For Israel would become boastful, saying, 'My own power has delivered me.' Now therefore come, proclaim in the heaven of the people, saying, 'Whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead.' So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, 'The people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Therefore it shall be that he of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, he shall go with you. But everyone of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go.' So he brought the people down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, 'You shall separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue as the dog laps, as well as everyone who kneels to drink.' Now the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people kneeled to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, 'I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped, and will give the Midianites into your hands. So let all other people go, each man to his home.' So he took the 300 men and the people's provisions and their trumpets to their hands. And Gideon sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent, but retained the 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley."
Good morning.
Good morning.
Have you heard this story before?
Yes.
No? Yes? No? Okay, so this story, I don't know, maybe it was an actual story of what happened, but in terms of how we're going to approach it, we're going to look at it as a metaphor. Does everyone know what a metaphor is? Metaphor, an allegory. Whoa, metaphor. So metaphor means it has a significance, right? It doesn't necessarily mean literally, right? So if you want to be vigilant and you want to be part of God's will and you want to be part of those 300 guys, you're going to go down and you're going to drink water by kneeling and lapping it out of your hand, right? So that's taking the story literally, right? Sometimes some people like to take God's word literally, and we don't try to find the deeper meaning behind it, right? So let's look at the story from the point of view of a metaphor, as in like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean to be vigilant, to be the person that doesn't get sent home and put in the tent because you're not paying attention, right? So we're in the Unification Church, right? The Unification Church was started by the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. And I joined the Unification Church in the 1990s, and during that time, Reverend Moon spent a lot of time fishing in the ocean. Is that correct? Does anyone remember that? Remember that he would wake up early in the morning, talk to the members, and then fish all day long, right? So according to Reverend Moon, he was doing God's will, right? We believe that Reverend Moon was doing the will of God. So he was going out and fishing all day long. So if you think of like a person going fishing, do you think, he's doing the will of God? Right? Like fishing, right? I'm going to go fishing today. That's like, I'm supposed to go to work. Gone fishing, right? Gone fishing. Usually like, I'm not taking responsibility for my job. I'm going fishing. Woohoo! But Reverend Moon was like, I'm doing the will of God. I'm going out on a boat. I'm going to go fishing. That's kind of odd, right? That's an odd way of doing God's will. Or how about, let's think of Jesus. So Jesus did God's will. He disappeared for As far as we know, from the ages of 12 to the ages of 30, we have no idea what Jesus was doing. There was no buildings, towers built. There was no, business created. There was no large amounts of money. There was actually not even a following, right? Correct? He was completely alone when he started his mission when he was 30 years old. So what did he do during all this time? Like what made these men so vastly interesting to us? Even though from an external point of view, they accomplished little to nothing from the point of view of what we generally consider an accomplishment, right? Gone fishing for 40 years fishing on a boat. But somehow or another there's something is going on, right? There's something called, what we call in the Unification Church, called the foundation of faith, right? The foundation of faith, it means what's going on in your head, right? What's going on in our head, in our mind? What's our relationship with God? So somehow this foundation of faith is elusive, right? It's very difficult to establish this foundation of faith, this internal vigilance, right? What was the difference between these men, right? They were all like, oh, we're going to war, But the difference was their internal vigilance, correct? So in other words, according to if you read sort of interpretations of this story, it's the men that were the men that just kind of, oh my gosh, here's the water, and stuffed their face in the water. They weren't looking to see if there were enemies around. So the men that were like, it's time to drink water, but I'm going to remain vigilant. I'm going to keep looking to see where the enemy is. So God's like, they're paying attention. They're paying attention. He didn't say, oh, pay attention now, right? It's time for you to pay attention. Who's paying attention? Oh, we're all paying attention, right? That came from within those men. God wanted to see who is paying attention without being told to pay attention, right? Like he tricked them. That was a trick, right? To see who's paying attention. And then he's like, those guys are concerned. They know that everything isn't safe. Everything isn't okay. We need to be working things out. So the question is, like, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for me to be vigilant, right? Especially as we, as life continues, because some of us here are still quite young, right? And have many options ahead of us, right? Sometimes as you get older, your external options get less and less, right? So you can think, oh, well, I have no options, I can't go and get 500, choose between 500 different universities to go to school to, right? Like, you still have lots of options, correct? So as you get older, sometimes your options diminish, right? They get smaller. But the question still remains, like, well, how do you continue to be vigilant, right? How do you continue to be vigilant even though perhaps, you're not being called to war, right? You're not being called to a mission. You're not being told to do this, that, or the other, right? We're not selling tickets to some event. We're not out witnessing on the streets, right? So how is it that when God needs someone, he can be like, aha, that person's paying attention. Like, what is it that we can do, right? What is it that we can do? So these are things that are invisible, right? They're not visible. You can be like, well, I'm doing 100K, and I'm going to this program or that program. Is that being vigilant? Is that really being vigilant, right? What is being vigilant? Right? So we have our hearts, right? We have our hearts. And sometimes, like a river that's running, right? Sometimes the water slows down and Sometimes a beaver comes and builds a dam, and then the water stops running. And our hearts sometimes, our spiritual life is sometimes like that. Sometimes we hit some kind of a barrier, or something happens to us, and that we don't even realize it, but suddenly we're like, I'm not just sure I want to go down those rapids anymore, Or maybe like, oh, my boat's got a hole in it now. I'm going to stay here on the side of the river, right? And so sometimes unconsciously or even consciously, we get out of the river, we get out of the water, we go and sit in a small edge or kind of go up a different stream. And it turns out that we just stay there, and slowly the water starts to turn murky, starts to turn dark, and we stop, and there's this term, right? The living water of Christ, the living water of Christ. So living water is always moving, right? As soon as water stops moving, it stagnates. I have a pool, and me and my pool have a difficult relationship. It generally wins. The pool generally wins. As soon as I don't pay attention to my pool's like, ha 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 ha, I will now defeat you. You will now have to pay great amounts of money in chlorine and all sorts of other substances to remove the green sludge that has developed on the bottom of this pool. And I'm like, oh, I'm sure that little pool thing is going to start working one of these days, It stops. So I have to pay money and get my pool to start working, and sometimes it takes a long time to clear the water in that pool. So living water, in the Bible it talks about the living water of Christ. So the living water is water that's always moving. It's always moving, right? Time never stops moving. Even when you go to the spirit world, for those of you who believe in the spirit world, time doesn't stop moving. And this whole idea of when we get to the kingdom of heaven, I'm always like, oh, that sounds so great. Time's going to stop moving there, and everything's going to be cool. And I'm not going to have to worry about things. And I'm like, wait. Time continues, Even at this destination that we're headed for, we have to keep moving, right? We have to keep moving. Actually, being in the kingdom of heaven means you're moving. We continue living, right? So, how do we become water that continues to flow? That continues to move, right? Especially when, I was talking to a friend of mine. She lives in France. She's having a really difficult situation in her family right now, and she's kind of like, I'm ready to just come home. I'm ready to leave my husband, and we just can't work things out. It's like there's too many struggles. And he's done this so many times, and I've done this so many times, and it's like they're in a rut, right? They're in a rut. So the solution is bail, right? Let's bail. But then, for some of us, right, who have bailed, shall we say, the solution doesn't finish. There's no solution, right? You're like, oh, okay, well, now I'm single, and I don't have this other person, and we're not in the same rut, and then you're in your own rut, You're in your own mental rut, right? Too much information for Keisha. So the question is well, how do we get out of our own rut? It doesn't matter what our circumstances are, right? There's this saying, wherever you go, there you are, right? So, oh my gosh, I'm gonna move. I'm gonna go somewhere else, and then things are gonna be better there, And then you move, and you're somewhere else, and things are not better there. Because you still looking in the mirror, there you are. You can run from yourself, but you won't get far, right? Right? But then that process of trying to deal with ourselves is elusive. It's difficult. And often it's painful, right? Like when I have to when you have to, when your pool is, okay, at one point my pool got really bad, all right? So this is the pool story. So at one point a tree fell in my pool. Like an entire tree, like literally like there was a picture of the, there was barely any pool left. It was just tree, So the tree, we got the insurance, took the tree out, blah, blah, blah. But somehow or another, like there's something called, I think they're called phosphates. I'm not sure what they are. So there's this certain thing that gets into the water that's invisible that generally is caused by excrement. So I was like, So like no matter what I did, this pool just would not get better. And I was having a really hard time in my life. And so it's like, I couldn't handle all the phosphates in my mind. So there's no way I was going to deal with the phosphates in that pool. So it was like that pool was a metaphor of me, and I was like, oh gosh, will it ever be clean, So it got so bad that basically at one point, I had to empty out the pool. So I had to go and rent out a pump, right? And they're like, well, you can't use this pump because, you need a permit to empty your pool and your neighbors are going to call up. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to, make sure no one's, hide it behind a bush, So anyway, I emptied the pool. And then, this scum had, I think it's called, it's a special kind of mold that develops on the pool walls. It was like a green mold. It had power. It was powerful. And there was no way to get rid of it except to scrub it and to spray it directly with chlorine. I had to scrub the entire pool and spray it with, not watered down chlorine. I had to spray it with chlorine. I was like, So it took 3 days. I probably had to go to the chiropractor for 3 months afterwards. And my kids are like, "We'll help, Mom. We'll help." Yeah, I did this square foot here. So anyways, I had to do it all myself, right? Anyhow, that pool was a metaphor of me. So it kind of was my job to get it done. And ever since then, I have respect for the mold. I have respect for the moss. And I'm scared of it, right? I'm like, oh, it looks slightly green. And I'm like, chlorine, right? I'm really afraid of it getting to that place where it's going to cost me an extra $200 to shuck it, right? So in our lives, right, often we get to a place where we need to shuck shuck the mold and the stagnation out of us, right? And sometimes if we don't do it ourselves, then sometimes God does it for us, right? Something happens in our life that shocks us and throws us out of our rut, and then we're like, curse you, God, everything was fine until you got me in a car accident or whatever it was, right? And then you're like, oh, well, actually, now that I look back on this, it was really, you were doing me a favor and you're getting me out of my rut. So often when everything goes wrong in our lives, we're like, oh, everything was just fine in my moldy pool. I could still swim in it, right? So sometimes we don't want to wait till our pool gets moldy, right? We want to live in living water. And living water means living water, not like, oh, I've studied God's word. The book is closed now, and now I'm off about my business, I'm off about my business. I did my study. It's all in here. It's all in my head, right? So how does that translate to actually living water, right? Living water, And especially when there's difficulties in your life, that are literally roadblocks everywhere. Roadblock here, roadblock there, this person here, my job, my kids, my husband, my wife, my finances, like, oh, there's nowhere to turn. There's no exit here. There's no exit. So then you have to go like, all right, there's nowhere to go outside, so now we have to go inwards, right? We have to go inwards and clean house internally, right? So the external situation sometimes is just, right, it's just an opportunity. It's just an opportunity to clean house, And if we look at things like, wow, this little tragedy is an opportunity. This thing that this person did that just made me feel like I wanted to die is maybe an opportunity for me to face, some roadblocks within my own heart, And then once you start lifting the roadblocks in your heart, right, then the water within can maybe start to flow, right? And sometimes that process takes time. It doesn't happen from one day to the other. It took me a long time to clean that pool. And it took me a long time to learn how to maintain it, to be like, ha-ha, the water's getting low, I need to add water, right? And then there's some days where I'm like, I don't care how many leaves are in there, I'm going to watch Netflix, right? I don't want to deal with it right now. So if I do that for a long time, things can get really bad, right? Things can get really stagnant, really broken, really fast. So how to be vigilant, right? How to be vigilant. I think we all deal with it in a different way. Like, I'm like, oh, pray about it, right? And people are like, God never talks to me, Or some people are like, I'm going to go exercise, right? We all, Charles is like, well, you should give them a clear plan on how to do these things, And I'm like, oh, well, here are the rules. You do this and this and this and this, right? But sometimes the cleaning of our hearts is messy. It's messy, and it's not like I can give you a little rule book and you can follow that rule book. Like, I followed the rule book, I'm flowing water now, Like, it's not always a simple process. And I think that it's really a process of introspection. It's a process of introspection that we all have to do to a certain extent on our own. We all have to figure out how to do it, What works for one person does not work for another person. The book that I read that might be like, whoa, it's all clear to me now. I'll be like, here, you'll figure it all out if you read this book. And the other person's like, I read 2 paragraphs and it was really boring. And, I'm like, Keanu, this music is great. He's like, trash. I'm like, okay. Then I'm like, turn it off, Keanu, I can't stand, your dysonic music. I'm like, ah! You have to find like musicians that are sort of in between his and my style. So we have like certain musicians, okay, we can both listen to this music. So what works for one person doesn't always work for another person, right? Some people like rap, some people like Vivaldi, okay? Like, rap will help you deal with your problems. Rap will make some people like crash into a wall, right? So, or for example, like I'll be like, oh, well, I have these spiritual experiences and blah, 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 and they're like, what? What are you talking about? And then my daughter Shay was like, yeah, and sometimes I feel people push me, and I was like, what? So everybody experiences the world in a different way. It doesn't mean that our process, that you can't go through your process. Everyone has to process their issues in their own way, But I think that the beginning starts with the intention of facing them. The intention of facing them and the intention of recognizing that everything in our life is really, the situations that are put in front of us, they're even the really painful ones and the ones that are like, they seem intolerable and they seem impenetrable and they're real, right? You never deal with your situation when it's something that isn't real, right? Like, oh, I'm going to pretend to deal with my situation. It's always when it's a real thing, with real repercussions, with real life situations, that you actually really deal with your problems. That we really deal with them. So, when we're faced with those real problems, then how do we, what you don't deal with them when you're like, oh, why did this happen to me? That's not fair. As soon as we think that way, then we miss the opportunity, right? So when many of us in the church who joined earlier, they talked about being grateful, right? Being grateful, that paying indemnity is when, people reject you and you remain grateful, right? So we used to do a lot of door-to-door sales. That was what we used to do. So it's like, how much persecution can you receive without becoming resentful? Without being like, well, that was not fair. That was not fair. I wasn't trying to hurt you. So, of course you can be like, oh, and you can hate, beat yourself over the head for becoming resentful, but in a sense, like, the process of feeling resentment is, in a way, the process of you being like, oh, trigger warning, I'm resentful, something's going on, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling like there's always a trigger warning, Every time that we want to do something compulsive and self-destructing, it's like a warning signal. Ding, 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 something's going on. Something's going on inside. I don't even know what it is, right? Something bothered me. Something, either now or from my past, or, So there's this song called Birch Tree by a band called Fools, and it says, time doesn't heal when you run away from it. But you have to turn and you have to face it. Like, you have to face time. You have to face the things in your heart, And it's like you're in the same situation, but with your heart, when your heart just kind of twists a little bit, or maybe can see things just for 1 second, can look in a different direction. The circumstance changes, right? I like to walk. I like to walk a lot. I go to the forest and I walk, And when I'm in a really bad state of mind, like when I'm really depressed, which is never, right? When I'm really heavy and dark and everything, actually, the beauty around me is almost like an insult, I'm like, everything's so beautiful and I'm so miserable, like, And I'm just walking through a beautiful forest, right? I should be happy, right? And then I'll be walking through the forest and I'm in a good state of mind and I'm like, look at that beautiful bird flying in the air. So beautiful, So, it's like, what's going on in your head? It's like the circumstances don't even matter. Right? They don't even matter. What's happening inside of our mind trumps everything. Trumps everything and almost dictates reality as we see it. Dictates reality as we see it. So, in the divine principle it says that, the spirit world was created first and the physical world was created second, and that the spirit world is the subject, right? And I was like, what does that mean? The spirit world is subject? Whatever the spirit world says, I should do it, What does that mean? The spirit world is subject. That's such a confusing words, right? But from the point of view of whatever your spirit world, your mind is, that is kind of what dictates how your life is, right? Above your physical situation. My mother grew up in a very poor, really poor and really difficult situation when she was little, She had trouble buying shoes, that kind of level, right? Like, her dad, apparently when she was 12 years old, they went to the beach. She lived in New Jersey, in Packanack Lake, if you know where that is, or Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is not the best part of New Jersey. And when she was like 12 years old, apparently their dad took the car and drove off and left them for good. Like they were at a family gathering at the beach, and their dad left them at the beach. They couldn't even get home, right? So she grew up in this kind of really difficult situation, really, really difficult situation. And then she married my dad, who was like an incredibly successful man. And she went to live in Ecuador, and she had servants, and we lived in like a mansion, and like she didn't have to do anything. Like everyone was like, wow, she's got it made. And my dad was like the bachelor, like the wanted bachelor of, the certain Ecuadorian people that we lived around. He was a desired man, and she married him, She was like, it was never enough, right? It was never enough. She was always very unhappy, She was very, very unhappy because she couldn't overcome what was going on in her heart, So often we're like, oh, if only I had money, If only things were better, if I lived in a nice house, right? But the reality is, sometimes if your heart is stagnant, it's almost like a better circumstance just ends up making you more aware of just how stagnant your heart, and it's actually more depressing, right? Oh my God, I've got everything that I wanted, and I still am not happy. It's very confronting, right? It's confronting. It's difficult because then you're like, where do I go now? Where do I go now, right? So then that's where, I don't know, this thing's making noises. That's where we have to find a way, to bring prayer, to bring God, find a way to face, whatever things happen to us in our childhood, or whatever happened to you yesterday, or whatever is happening, you're afraid of going to happen to you tomorrow, and look at it and be like, how can I turn this room that feels like it has no doors, how can I find a door, How can I go outside in my mind, in my mind? And then the circumstances will be less, the circumstances around us will feel less controlling, because we can become living water within, right? So Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, all these great prophets, right? Externally, there's nothing different, right? But they became living water from inside, from within, right? And that's a kind of vigilance, right? It's a kind of vigilance, because in remaining living internally, facing our demons, facing our pain, facing our fear, right? That actually, the water starts to move. It starts to move. It's the process of cleansing, right? And sometimes you have to throw chlorine in there to kill the deads, kill all this stuff. You got to throw stuff in it, You have to churn the water, You have to filter it. And then we can be living water, the flowing water, right? In our minds, before we can be flowing water in the world. We have to find that clarity. So Reverend Moon spent hours and hours and hours fishing out in the ocean. So I slightly suspect that he was working inside. He was working inside of himself, So the providence begins from within ourselves. Amen. Amen. Okay, so do I pray or pray? Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to really reach out to you and ask you to please help us to face our own shortcomings and face the mold inside of us, Heavenly Father, and that we can appreciate and be grateful for the circumstances that come to us that are really opportunities for us to clean house, to clean our own pool, so that we can be flowing water, Heavenly Father. So I sincerely ask you to please be with everyone that's here in this room, that you may please comfort them and guide them, Heavenly Father, that you can help us, one tiny step at a time, start to look within, Heavenly Father, and so that one day, we can be one of those 300 men that you say, come with me, come with me. Heavenly Father, we just thank you, and we offer this prayer with gratitude in the name, my name, Catherine Wright, and as a community.